Her wrists were bound by cold handcuffs, the labor pains becoming unbearable. The two white officers turned their backs on her cries, ignoring both her agony and the threat to her life. They had no idea they had arrested the wife of the police commissioner himself, whose fury would soon descend upon them. This incident not only disrupted the usual order, but also unveiled the darkest layers. It was late evening. The streets were almost deserted as Marianne Kingston, 8 months pregnant, hurried out of a 24-hour store with a small basket of fruit and a bottle of milk. She was reaching for her car when she noticed a patrol car with 2 officers inside. Their piercing gazes unsettled her, but she chose to ignore them. Placing her groceries on the passenger seat, she started the engine. Just as the car began to move, the patrol car's sirens blared. "Pull over!" a commanding voice boomed through the loudspeaker. Marianne sighed, feeling her heart race. She stopped the car and rolled down the window. 2 white officers approached, their expressions a mix of suspicion and hostility. "License," one demanded without introduction. Marianne handed over her driver's license calmly. "Is there a problem, officers? Have I done something wrong?" Her voice was steady but tinged with apprehension. "Your behavior seemed suspicious," the second officer said curtly. "We saw you nervously looking around in the store." "Nervous? I was just shopping. I'm pregnant and trying to get home quickly," Marianne replied. The first officer frowned and stepped back, exchanging a look with his partner. "Step out of the car," he ordered sharply. "That's not necessary," Marianne began. "Don't make us use force," the second officer interrupted, grabbing the door handle. Marianne cautiously exited, keeping her hands on her belly. She looked the officers directly in the eyes. "Please, I've done nothing wrong. My due date is near." One of the officers hesitated briefly, but his partner ignored her words. "Hands behind your back," he ordered, pulling out handcuffs. "This is a misunderstanding." Marianne tried to explain, but the officer had already cuffed her hands. A small crowd of onlookers began to gather. Drawn by the flashing lights, people started filming the scene on their phones. "Hey, what are you doing? She's pregnant!" a man in the crowd shouted. "None of your business," the officer barked. "Step back, or you'll be arrested for interference." Marianne felt a sharp pain in her stomach. "Please," her voice trembled. "Something's wrong. I think I'm in labor." The officers exchanged uncertain glances. "She's faking it to get out of trouble," one muttered. "Labor? Right now?" the other scoffed. Marianne screamed, doubling over. "My water just broke! Please, call an ambulance!" Several bystanders shouted in alarm. "What's wrong with you? She needs help!" The officers looked flustered, but kept their indifferent facade. "We'll handle this ourselves," one said, addressing the crowd. Suddenly, a woman in the crowd declared loudly, "I already called an ambulance. This is all being recorded, officers. You're going to lose your badges." The officers began whispering to each other, realizing they were losing control of the situation. Before they could act further, someone in the crowd recognized Marianne. "She's the wife of Commissioner Kingston. Do you know who you just arrested?" The words hung in the air, silencing everyone. The officers froze, their faces betraying their dawning comprehension. Soon the sound of ambulance sirens filled the air. The videos recorded by witnesses were already spreading across social media, sparking outrage. Marianne felt her strength fading. She sat down on the sidewalk, clutching her belly. Her final glance before being placed on a stretcher was at the phones documenting every moment of the incident. By the next morning, the footage of Marianne Kingston's arrest had gone viral, amassing millions of views. Headlines blared, "Pregnant woman arrested for the color of her skin," and "Scandal, police commissioner's wife handcuffed." The video ignited a firestorm of anger, with people demanding answers from the police as the city became a focal point of national controversy. In the precinct, Police Commissioner Robert Kingston stumbled upon the video on a colleague's phone. For a few seconds, he couldn't believe his eyes. "This can't be real," he whispered, feeling a wave of fury and dread wash over him. Grabbing his car keys, he stormed out of his office, ignoring the questions of those around him. At the station, Robert found the 2 officers trying to cover their tracks. Marianne was being held in a holding cell, her face pale and strained. Unable to contain his emotions, Robert burst through the precinct doors. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice thundered through the halls. The officers froze, their faces going pale as they recognized who he was. "Sir, we thought she was—" one began, only for Robert to cut him off. "You thought? Did you see her condition? Who gave you the right to treat a pregnant woman this way?" He turned to Marianne, who was seated with her hand on her stomach. "Marianne, are you okay?" His voice softened. "I'm in pain, Robert," she whispered. "They ignored my pleas, even when my labor started." Clenching his fists, Robert turned back to the officers. "Release her immediately and get medical assistance now." One officer stammered. "We didn't know who she was." "Who she was?" Robert roared. "You didn't know she was a person? Wasn't that enough?" By the time the ambulance arrived at the precinct, a crowd had gathered outside. Reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens all demanded justice. Robert escorted his wife to the ambulance, his gaze never leaving the two officers. Meanwhile, the incident dominated TV screens and social media. Politicians, journalists, and activists questioned the integrity of the entire system. Under mounting public pressure, the city's mayor called an emergency meeting, demanding accountability from the police department. Protests outside the police station were escalating. The video of Marianne's arrest had become national news, sparking a wave of outrage. The public demanded not only the dismissal of the officers involved, but also systemic reforms. Police Commissioner Robert Kingston held a press conference where he acknowledged the department's wrongdoing. "Yes, that woman is my wife, but that's not what matters. What matters is that the system is broken. We will begin reforms." Internal investigations were launched within the department. The officers involved in the arrest tried to defend their actions. She was acting suspiciously, they claimed. However, the investigation revealed that their actions were rooted in bias. Activists organized a petition demanding mandatory anti-discrimination training. It quickly gained thousands of signatures, pressuring the city administration to take action. Tensions were brewing within the department itself. Captain Brown openly challenged Robert. "You're throwing your own people under the bus." To which Robert replied firmly, "If you can't find your place in a reform department, then leave." An interview with Marianne became the final straw for many. "This isn't just my story. Thousands of people face this every day," she said. The situation reached a boiling point. Robert realized there was no turning back. Ahead lay a real fight for change. The pressure on Commissioner Kingston intensified. Protests had spread across the city, demanding immediate action. But Robert refused to back down. He introduced sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, body cameras for every officer, and transparency in internal investigations. These measures were met with resistance from within the department. Captain Brown, along with several other officers, openly boycotted the changes. "We're here to maintain order, not play political games," Brown declared. Robert responded resolutely. "If you can't work with integrity, you don't belong here." Several officers resigned in protest. However, they were replaced by younger recruits, eager to embrace the new vision for policing. This marked the first step in reshaping the department's structure. Meanwhile, the case against the officers who arrested Marianne went to court. One officer attempted to justify his actions, offering an apology. "We made a mistake, and I regret it." The other officer, however, refused to admit fault, claiming it was a standard check. The court's decision sent shockwaves through the city. One officer was dismissed, while the other was sentenced to mandatory training and community service. Protests in the streets began to subside. People saw that change was possible. Support for the reforms grew. During this time, Marianne, having recovered from the ordeal, spoke at a public event dedicated to combating bias. "I got through this because of my family," she said. "But many don't have that support. We must continue fighting for justice for everyone." Her words received a standing ovation, marking a turning point in the movement for change. Robert returned home that evening to find Marianne playing with their newborn daughter. "We did it," he said, embracing her. "It's just the beginning, but you've taken the first step," she replied with a smile. The city began to change, slowly but surely. The new policing policies became a model for other cities to follow. The Kingston family became a symbol of the fight for justice, proving that even in the face of immense challenges, transformation is possible.